sometimes our parents aren't lovey-dovey and touchy-feely. And a lot of times we feel like we need that, but sometimes they're not able to give what we need in that vein because they didn't have it.
Hey y'all, it's Shawana Stevens with the Well Network, and this is the Life and Podcast, because you know life be lifing. Hey y'all.
Hey y'all, it's Shawana Stevens with the Life and Podcast.
Hey y'all.
Hey y'all, it's Shawana Stevens with the Life and Podcast, and today we're actually talking about healing from daddy issues. Now, before we get into the episode, I do want to say, please, if you have a moment, please like the video, please comment and engage with us throughout the video. Now, today, like I said, we're talking about daddy issues, and I never really understood the whole daddy issues thing until I actually had to process it for myself. I remember a woman coming to me and telling me, you will not have a successful relationship with your husband if you don't process your relationship with your dad. And so I want to actually start out by saying a lot of us have relationships with our dads, and we may have really great relationships, but there may be like certain small little things that we need to address and process in our relationships. And for me, and I want to say in celebration of Father's Day, I had an awesome father. I have an awesome father. My dad was actually my mom and my dad, because of course, if you know my story, my mom passed really early. And so he raised us almost with a fear that we wouldn't be successful, and he wanted to make sure that he honed in on that. For that reason, I had a really strict father. So I was mad with him for most of my life. But I will say there are so many things that I can recognize as things that he was really adamant about making sure that I grew up with certain characteristics and values, and he honestly was successful in that vein. But what I want to say is the little things the little differences that we had, I learned really early in my marriage that those things carried over to my relationship. Me and my dad had a really open relationship. Like, he was very adamant about making sure that I talked. Like after my mom passed, I kind of didn't want to speak my mind and didn't really have a whole lot of expectations for life and things like that. And he was determined to make sure that I wasn't that way. In addition to that, his being really strict also did suppress certain things in my personality. And so my anger in that area caused an anger in other areas. Now, I really hope he will come on the show. He actually said he would. So I really want us to actually talk about some of those things. But what I will say is that, I recognize that it was hard to try to raise a girl. But in my relationships with men, in my relationship even with my husband, I had to understand that my outspokenness with my dad had to be processed, because I couldn't really take that into my relationship with my husband. Yes, you speak your mind and you say the things that are important, but the way that me and my dad communicate was not the way that me and my husband communicate. When we marry, we don't necessarily marry our fathers, right? Although they say that we do. We look for characteristics that we see in our dads and our husbands. But I needed to make sure that I understood that my husband wasn't my dad. And I needed to make sure that I got an opportunity to learn my husband in a way, to know how to communicate with him. And that's a big thing. In our house, with my home with my dad, it was my dad, my brother, and me. So we yelled at each other. We would yell at each other. We were harsh. We talked really hard at each other. We laughed, we joke, and we could be laughing and joking and yelling at each other as if we were really mad. And although we didn't let it bother us. But then in my home, I had to realize I can't communicate with my husband like that. I can't just yell at my husband. And so there are so many things that we have to actually actually process in our relationships with our spouses, or in our relationships with boyfriends and things like that. Because a lot of things from our relationships with our dads, we can't bring there. Another thing I remember, I would always seek for validation from my husband. And every man, I've polled, I've had a poll with a lot of my close male friends and cousins, and there's a thing about confidence that men have. Men have a thing with confidence. They love to date or to experience confident women. My dad was the type of dad that he would overdo it in validation, because he wanted to make sure that even though I didn't have my mom, I understood that I could do anything, that I was beautiful and all those different things. So I was looking at my husband like, you should be complimenting me every 5 minutes, and things of that nature. But I had to realize that was my dad's way, and I couldn't bring that over to my relationship with my husband. I remember talking to a young lady once, and she was really talking about how she was upset with her dad for cheating on her mother. So I'm talking about different issues that I've experienced with other people, things that they are holding in adulthood. And in this one particular situation, I remember speaking to her and just kind of saying, look, you can't punish every man for what your father did, if that makes sense. And I want to say, in order for us to get over some of those things and to move past them, the first thing that I had to do, not saying this particular situation, but some other things that I had to process with my dad, I had to actually recognize that he is actually not just Superman. He's actually a man too. I remember the first time I actually looked at my dad and saw him as a man. Right? Not my dad, not daddy, but a man, I think it's hard for us to process that sometimes, especially as adult children, because all we know is the person that provided for us. All we know is the person that just loves on us, right? But we don't understand sometimes their needs and their what's going on in their heads. And I know for me, there were things that I wanted my dad to do that I thought he couldn't do. One of the things specifically is spend more time. I thought, hey, my dad should be spending more time with me as a kid, not realizing that your dad is being two people. There are two incomes that a complete home has, but he has to work extra hard to accommodate or compensate for. He has to overcompensate and work, because he's now filling the role of my mom and her income, as well as his income as well. And so where does the time come from? Where does that time come from? And I guess when I realized as an adult, you know what, that must have been really hard, I then could appreciate the fact that, well, he did provide for us. He did make sure that we were okay. We never went to school looking a hot mess. And if we did, it was only by choice. It wasn't because he didn't provide. So I had to actually process those things. And I think when we're talking about processing our feelings and things of that nature as it relates to our daddy issues, we do have to recognize our parents, and this can apply to women, moms as well. We have to recognize them as real people. And the other thing I had to do was actually recognize the shortcomings. I had to recognize the fact that also, and my dad says this all the time, even in his sermons and things of that nature, that he came from a hard background. Like his parents were really hard. So when you process that, sometimes our parents aren't lovey-dovey and touchy-feely. And a lot of times we feel like we need that, but sometimes they're not able to give what we need in that vein because they didn't have it. And so I think as an adult, me recognizing the shortcomings and where they stem from helped me understand, okay, I need to have grace in this area. In addition to that, though, like I said, I did have a really great father. The things that he had an abundance of, those things were a really strong work ethic. Like, he worked really hard. Not only that, he was a man that lived by his dreams, and a lot of people say, hey, Shawana, you're such a dreamer. I'm a dreamer because my dad taught me how to be a dreamer. And so I think as adult children, we do have to recognize, yes, there are shortcomings, but then also look at the positives as well, and focus more on the positives than the negatives. I will say that the biggest way that I saw my daddy issues showing up in my marriage was more so me having an expectation, a hidden expectation that I never vocalized. And I think when we start talking about being in relationships, we do have to make sure we talk through some of the things that are in our heads. So I want to encourage the person that does have issues with their dad, mainly does not have a good relationship with their dad. Whether it be we just don't connect like that, we don't have the same ideas, we never really build a relationship, whatever it is, I want you to understand that if you do not have that relationship with your dad, right? How is it possible to have a relationship with a man, right? And the reason I say that is because men really are wired similarly. and sometimes we can have a warped understanding of what our relationships with our man is like, because we struggle on the other end. So I would love to continue talking about this. I do want to say, let's further talk. Right? So I want you to comment in the comment section. I want to know, what has your experience been as it relates to daddy issues? Do you have daddy issues? Do you know someone that has daddy issues? What are some of the things that you have done to get past yours? What are some of the misconceptions as it relates to daddy issues? Let's talk about it, and then let's do a part 2 if necessary. But later, stay up. Make sure you have a good relationship with your dad and even mom.